Okay, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are, good evening as well if you're in Europe. It is a real pleasure to welcome you today as we take a look at this really exciting new call for papers that we have on AI and generative AI. It is a real pleasure to introduce three outstanding guest editors that we have for this special issue. First up, we've got Ben Lowe. He's a professor of marketing at Kent Business School at the University of Kent in beautiful Canterbury in the UK. Was there this summer for a conference. It's amazing. He's also an associate editor for Alpha JAR. His research is based around consumer behavior, and he's published widely in the area with a specific focus around innovation adoption, pricing, sustainable consumption, and the use of technology to help consumers make better decisions. He's also gone through and done an international book on marketing research, which is now in its fifth edition, and he's published in a ton of leading journals as well. So thank you, Ben, for being on this call for papers. Next up, we've got Eddie Luo, and he's a lecturer in marketing at Kent Business School as well, too, same location as well. And his research interests include advertising, innovation adoption, consumer behavior, and marketing strategies. And he's also published widely in top journals as well. And really great topics and a great fit with the special issue. And then finally, we have Des. He's a senior lecturer in e-commerce at Kent Business School as well. Notice the theme here. And his overarching research theme is electronic markets. His research interests are in online advertising, artificial intelligence and machine learning, crowdfunding, social media, search engines, and aggregators. So a really nice fit with this emerging topic around AI and generative AI. Before we get to talking about the call for papers, a couple quick reminders just around JAR. So first big one is stay connected with us. If you're new to JAR, if you're not subscribed to our newsletter or following our YouTube channel or LinkedIn page, please sign up for our newsletter, follow our different accounts just to keep up to date with the latest information that we have that's coming out. So really encourage you to go through and do that. And this QR code is the same. It takes you to the link tree with all these different links. So please, at any of these different pages, you can scan that and get connected with us. Other one as well too, this is a big tip for those looking to go through and publish in JAR, whether in this special issue or more broadly, is there's a editorial that I did earlier in the year, basically with a bunch of tips for getting published in JAR. So I encourage you, if you're thinking about submitting maybe for the first time, take a look at this and just sort of check out some of these tips to make sure that your submission's as strong as possible and is likely to go through and hopefully get published. Other one as well too is that earlier this year, back in March, it came out with a research priorities list. This is sort of similar to what the MSI does, where they go through and basically take a look at hot topics in marketing. This is the same idea, except it's for advertising. And so I went through and talked to a whole bunch of folks in industry to find out what they care about and what are the topics that they think are most interesting to study. You'll notice AI machine learning being one of the top ones, which is the reason we've got this call for papers. So again, if you want to take a look at this, you can check that out. There's a link there to that article, and you can learn more about all of these different topics if you're looking for other ideas beyond this really cool call for papers. So at this point, I'm going to turn over the floor to Ben, Eddie, and Des and let them tell you more about their call for papers, what they're looking for. And once they're through with that, they'll open it up to questions from the audience as well too. But feel free to write those at any point during the chat. We may just get them a little bit later once they've gone through their description.
Great. Thanks, Colin, for the introduction. And very excited to be doing this special issue for JAR. Just wanted also to thank everyone who's attending for coming along and making the time. So thanks for being here. I know we're all busy, so appreciate you making the effort to be here. I think probably what we'll do is just introduce the special issue. I'm not going to read through the call for papers because that's all online, but just give you a bit of an overview of what we're trying to do, and then mention some sort of key things to look out for, in particular the deadlines as well. So again, really excited to be running this special issue with my colleagues Des and Eddie, both at the University of Kent. We all know that, I guess, AI is revolutionizing many industries, many sectors, and we're not spared of that in the higher education sector. I spent a good portion of this week looking over some of my assessments and trying to redo those to make them less easily sort of to avoid what people can do on ChatGPT. So I think it's of no surprise to anyone that it's revolutionizing many sectors, and advertising is one sector which it's had a really big influence on already. One of the statistics that we put in the call for papers was from an Ad Age article by M Group, and it says that about 50% of advertising is expected to have some form of AI in 2023. To us, if we're academics in the marketing sector, that may not be a huge surprise, because we can think of the many different advertising decisions that need to be made where AI is relevant. But perhaps to consumers, that might be quite a surprise. Perhaps that might be quite a shock to some people in terms of the things that they're viewing and the degree to which that's influenced by artificial intelligence. Clearly, knowledge about AI and advertising in particular is still in its infancy. I know that over recent years, there's been some great articles, particularly in JAR as well, on different aspects of AI, and they serve as a starting point in many ways to help us think about the special issue and the way to sort of build on some of those articles that have been developed. So there was the article that we've referenced in the call for papers by Keatsman et al. In 2018 on in the speakers box section, which looked at how marketers leverage AI at different points along the customer journey. There's the article by Wu and Wen in 2021, which takes a look at AI from the consumer's perspective and tries to understand what the factors are which are sort of explaining people's appreciation of AI. And there's Colin's article and his colleagues in the 2022, which explains, looks at the promises and pitfalls of deep fakes in advertising. So a number of recent articles which you can draw on to think about how you're making the contribution. But I think again, what makes this special issue really exciting and good to be a part of is just that the area is so wide open. So there's plenty of scope really to be thinking about how you can make your contribution and carve out what those challenges are that marketers have to be aware of. Thinking about, again, I said I'm not going to go over in detail what the call for papers says because it's all up online. So obviously encourage you to read through that carefully. But just thinking about perhaps ways of classifying or categorizing some of the different areas that you might be thinking about. Certainly there's AI from the advertiser's perspective. So thinking about adoption of AI, and though that adoption's been fast, there's still a resistance to using AI in certain advertising contexts. So thinking about what are the factors that may explain that resistance. That might be one angle, and I think summarizes some of the questions that we raised in the call for papers. Likewise, looking at what the benefits and pitfalls of using AI are in the advertising process. Whilst there's been a lot of work showing what the benefits of using AI can be, there's also been a lot of work looking at some of the pitfalls and risks. And so I think understanding how we as advertisers and marketers can mitigate some of those risks is important from the advertiser's perspective. One common theme that seems to come up when we're looking at AI is the role of humans in that process of using AI and the degree to which humans should be involved in that. So I think that's an important theme to keep in mind as well, and reflect some of those questions that get raised in the call for papers. So even though there are the boundless opportunities, to what degree should humans be part of that process? Where, when, and in what capacity? And I think one of the key things that's come up in relation to AI and advertising has, of course, been around the ethical issues which exist for advertisers using AI, and how those risks can be mitigated. I think we can also look at it from the consumer's perspective, though, because again, going back to that statistic in the call for papers, if 50% of advertising uses some form of AI to generate it, to what degree does that connect with consumers, and what are the situations and circumstances where it connects with or disconnects with consumers? So in other words, how does this all land with the end consumer or the end customer? Are consumers even aware of AI and how it's used, and to what degree do they respond to its use when they know that it's being used? Where are they likely to react most negatively to AI? And again, how can marketers mitigate that risk through understanding consumer reactions? So yeah, didn't want to go over in great detail what was already written in the call for papers, because I think it's spelled out quite nicely there. But I think the main things to keep in mind are the special issue theme, and all of the articles which appear in the special issue ought to be relating very clearly to that theme of how advertisers can leverage AI and generative AI in advertising. So make sure that any submissions link clearly to that theme. And I think that very much fits with JR as a journal and its focus being on research that has practitioner value. So making sure that the practical implications are very clear and tangible there. I think that said, all articles, of course, are going to need to, all submissions are, of course, going to need to, be rigorous methodologically as well, and have a strong theoretical background and framework behind them. So important to keep those points in mind, those key overarching points. Submissions are open now, aren't they, Colin? I think. Yeah, so submissions are open now, and they run up until 25th of March. So you've got around about 6 months to get to the submission deadline. Plenty of time, but if you're anything like me, anything that you do takes twice as long as what you expect it's going to take. So, just keep that submission deadline in mind. But the submission system is open now. All manuscripts ought to be submitted through JAR's editorial manager online. So there's a link there on the call for papers to see that. And of course, following the JAR guidelines. Articles should be around about, give or take, 7,000 words, excluding references. And I think importantly, if you have any questions from about the special issue, then please feel free to address them to myself through email, copying in Des and Eddie as well. So our contact details are on the call for papers there. And we again just want to reiterate, we think this is a great opportunity. We're very happy to be a part of it, and we very much look forward to receiving submissions. I think it's really wide open here in terms of what we can do, in terms of us as a community setting the agenda for this really, really important and timely topic that's going to have a huge impact for us. So that's pretty much it for me, and I'm sure that people have questions. So obviously happy to go through any questions that have arisen.
While we're waiting for questions to come through, if anyone has any of those as well, were there any sort of types of papers you were looking for, any sort of other tips you might have when people go through and think about the methodologies they might use?
I think we're as we said, one of the advantages of this special issue is really it's wide open. And I think in that sense, we're quite open to different kinds of articles, using different methodologies. We're not going to be too prescriptive. It's great to see conceptual articles that are really well developed. But by the same token, we've got to keep an eye on the theme of the special issue, which is how that research is going to have an impact upon marketers. So We're quite wide open to ideas, I think. Would you agree, Des and Eddie, here in terms of different kinds of articles? But I think we're open to conceptual articles and different kinds of methodological different kinds of methodologies as well. Did you want to add anything, Des, already?
No, absolutely. I think the key thing is that the papers address the kind of core audiences of the JAR. So academics, practitioners, and so for example, we would very much welcome papers that are a combination of academics and practitioners, but they have to be rigorous and make a really strong contribution both to sort of theory and practice. I think a couple of other points, Ben, that we discussed with Colin as well was that we're looking for more than one study for rigor. A couple of other points I'd probably make, they're global papers, so for example, there's been lots of, very interesting innovations in China, for example, and in developing countries. We've also got a question on here as well. I think I've noticed we've got a question here from Claudio. Did you see that one, Colin?
Yeah,
Just saw that, yeah.
Do you want to read that out just or summarize it just in the interest of people who might be viewing online later? Yeah.
Sure. So the question is, the CFP, the call for papers, mentions many different companies, some of which are part of my professional network. My question is, what type of secondary data would be acceptable, or if any, for this issue? I think it goes back to that point we were just talking about. And I think in many ways, secondary data can be acceptable definitely as a research methodology. It depends how you apply it, but ultimately it has to have that ability to make a contribution both in terms of the practice in particular, but also in terms of theory. So there's a wide range of different kinds of secondary data that might be accessed, as long as it hits that key theme of the special issue, and as long as it is able to make that contribution that we're expecting in terms of practice, and has a strong theoretical base, then I think potentially we're open to most kinds of data, really.
I'd agree with that as well, Ben. I mean, for example, Claudio, I don't know what kind of data you're talking about. I mean, for an example could be, let's say, for example, so Google Ads data. That could be kind of an example. I think the key thing that we'd say really is, come up with your ideas, submit your papers, and of course there will be a vetting process in terms of initially what we think in terms of the quality of the paper, and then obviously anything that gets through that goes to review, but then it's really then what comes back from the reviewers and then our kind of interpretations, because it will be very competitive. The JAR is a high quality journal, and this is a hot area. So yeah, get your ideas in. We're looking at hitting those key audiences, with really high quality papers that have impact in lots of kind of different ways, citations, use in industry, and so on. So hopefully that answers the kind of question. But you can follow up, Claudio, with anything afterwards to us as well. Yeah, thank you.
Colin, and sorry, just to add to that, I saw a couple of other questions come in, but before we go to those, just to add to Claudio's question, I think the risk that is involved with secondary data is, in some circumstances, it can be quite descriptive, and we want to obviously move beyond the descriptive and make sure that there's a clear sort of contribution there in terms of practical implications.
Yeah, something I would say there, Ben, to add to that with Claudio as well, is that you need access to the kind of raw data. Sometimes I think you're better off going, I mean, we'd use the phrase the horse's mouth to get data from a company, but then you need to be able to then manipulate that data in a way which obviously makes a contribution to the literature. It needs to be a clear, kind of theoretical contribution. Okay. So we've got a couple of other questions there as well. Colin, you wanted to add something to the first one, did you?
Sure, I can take that one. Yeah. So we have a question here about is there a stipulated number of articles for the special issue? So JAR issues are generally at a max of around like 8 or 9 articles. That's typically what we'd be going for to be in the singular sort of print issue that might happen of this. But if we get the question's asking if we get, 10 papers that are amazing by December, well, number one, that's awesome. But number two, we can always find space if we have really quality submissions. So if you're an author, please don't rush your work, thinking that you have to get it in earlier to, get one of the spots. Also, my experience is that people typically tend to submit, closer to the submission deadline. But if we get an overwhelming number of amazing papers, that is totally fine. And that's my job to find space to publish that great work. Yeah.
Yeah. And the thing is, Emmanuel, it's not going to be, it won't happen by December anyway, because if the papers come in, they go out to the reviewers, people obviously review them when they're busy. You'd be looking realistically at probably, the end of the year, new year realistically for revisions, and then people go through at least one revision. And as we said as well, that there's no guarantee with a high quality journal that if it goes into revision that it's going to be accepted. It's the final products really that comes through. So okay, hopefully that answers everything fully for you. We've then got the next one there, haven't we, from the anonymous attendee. Ben, do you want to take that one?
So yeah, sure. So that question there was, what do you mean by needing more than one study for rigor? I suppose what we meant here was that, with data collection these days, in order to sort of make a very, solid contribution, that it's often important to have multiple studies, sometimes with different forms of data collection for triangulation purposes and things like that, perhaps. So, really you need to make the studies as strong as they can be. And often that means collecting multiple different forms of data. So I think that's really what we mean there, is that the more evidence you can provide, the better for your assertions. And often just being based on one study may not be enough to really make that contribution as clearly as you can do. Hopefully that helps to answer that one. But really, it's just about you making sure that you've provided as much evidence as possible to back up the claims you're making in the article, really.
Yeah, I mean, I very much agree with what Ben said as well. And I think also that's something you need to be aware of when you are, developing the paper. So, for example, it links through to the question before about the industry data, that if you're going to use industry data, you need access to the raw data, because it can't just be one approach, as Ben said, for purposes of rigor, and also here as well. Don't throw everything into just one study. You kind of need more than that, really. So I think it's things to be aware of at the beginning. We don't want anybody to kind of go down a cul-de-sac where it won't realistically have any chance of getting accepted.
And of course, there can be exceptions for things. So if you do, qualitative work, right, you could, if you're doing a bunch of interviews and things like that, it's slightly different. But typically, it's more so of an issue with if you're looking at experiments or if you're looking at survey data, because those are relatively easy to go through and collect. It just gives a lot more generalizability to the findings if you're able to go through and test a couple of different stimuli and do it over a couple of different experiments.
Yeah, and I suppose also, Colin, I think on the qualitative side, for example, it may be that people may interview, for example, advertisers, but then it may be that you get the perspective of agencies as well. Try to get different perspectives, that kind of thing, I suppose. Something I think is really interesting as well is this whole thing about bots as well. I think that I was thinking about this when we were talking about this, is that, for example, bots are very heavily, it's alleged that a large amount of our advertising expenditure is bot based. And on the one hand, AI is used by bots, and the other hand, AI is being used to catch bots. I think if anybody can find any data there, I think that would be a fascinating area to kind of develop. And I think that's what Ben was saying is, and Colin, when they told me about this issue, I was really excited. I worked in this area like 30 years ago, and it was expert systems. Obviously, things were very different. But I've done a lot of work in search as well, paid search, and that fits in really well with this, kind of field as well. So
yeah,
good.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I'd like to add something about the recommendation of more than one study. So fundamentally, this is a methodological issue to enhance your research reliability and validity. So if you just have one study, if it's convincing, for example, if you have go through precise literature review and your either qualitative or quantitative method is convincing and reliable, then that's something we're looking for. But if you provide extra evidence or additional evidence to support your data, your hypothesis, that's more than welcome, because JR do have a very strong focus on practice. So it's less likely that you do. I'm not saying about the qualitative research, but like Colin said, if you only have one study of experiment or survey, then the data is less likely to support the framework or the model precisely, and to provide a very convincing data to the practice, to the practitioners and managers of advertising industry. So that's the issue of methodological reliability and validity to require to ask for preferably more than one study and multiple research methods.
No, well said. Well said, Eddie. Yeah.
There's another question that's just come in. I can just read it out. It says, from an ad market perspective, there are plenty of concerns, doubts on the legal implications of leveraging Gen AI technologies, e.g. when generating ad copy, images used in advertising, but no one truly understands the impact of intellectual property concerns on Gen AI use cases or how to address it. Is there line of sight on academic research to concretely define, measure, and explore outcomes for this challenge? I think that was something we touched on in the call for papers around one of the areas, one of the indicative areas that was mentioned, not exactly in those terms, but I think it's related to one of those indicative areas. And I think probably the answer to that is yes, but I think, again, just going back to the key point is how you connect that to the special issue topic, which is how can advertisers leverage AI and generative AI. So I think as long as you can, make that connection, I think that's important. And then it goes back to the data issue, how you make that connection, and then of course back to the theory issue about how you use theory to help you understand that better. Did you want to add anything to that, Des, already, or?
Yeah, Ben, I think it's a good question. So thanks to the attendee for asking the question. I would agree with what Ben said. I also think that historically people used to look to the United States in terms of the legal side and data protection and so on. I think that I would very much say now this is probably something that is possibly best looked at in a European perspective because of the GDPR, which came in 2018 or something like that. But yeah, I think it's always a case of trying to link it back to the call for papers, and if it's something that this will be an interesting one where it could be pursued at a conceptual level, and then perhaps, for example, through qualitative research with interviews. I think that would be an interesting one to kind of take on. So yeah, my feeling with it would be that there's probably been more focus, I would say, in Europe because of the legislation, which people were very kind of worried about, but it seems to have been pretty generally kind of accepted, and that'd be my added view on it. So hopefully that complements what Ben said. Anything else, please come back.
Awesome. Any other final questions some folks might have for Ben, Des, and Eddie? Oh, we got one more that just came in. Yeah.
Okay, yep, just saw that one. So you pointed out several studies on the role of AI in advertising. What about previous studies on the role of technology in advertising more generally? Is there a particular stream in JAR that could be useful for submissions? I mentioned those articles, so good question. I mentioned those articles because it's obviously important with any work for any journal that you show how you build on that dialogue in that journal. So I mentioned those articles because they were specifically on the topic of AI and advertising in JAR. But you obviously don't need to constrain yourself to JAR. It's important to build on the dialogue in the literature in advertising and AI more broadly. So I think that there are it's important that you do the literature review, and that it's covering some of the top journals in marketing where that dialogue's being explained, but not necessarily to JAR in particular. But obviously those were some examples around AI and advertising in JAR more recently. So, I suppose just building on that, it really depends what your study's about. But if you do the literature review well, that's important, because that's how you form the basis of the article and your hypotheses, if that's the route you're going down.
Yeah, then I think the next one, I think the deep fake advertising. Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably one that Colin is probably better. I mean, obviously we're in a specialist, but I think definitely this would be this is an interesting topic, isn't it? But again, if it's linked to the literature, so obviously the deep fake advertising, if it's linked to, what's been it's making a clear contribution to the audiences of the JAR. Okay, and it's rigorous. So I'd say, yeah, I mean, it's definitely worth putting it in. Also, what I'd say, the previous question as well, Ben, it was the technology one. What I'd also say there as well is I think a key thing to me there is there's been a kind of distinction kind of put. So people have made this distinction, which isn't probably accurate really, between digital marketing and kind of technology marketing. It's something I've felt very strongly about the last kind of few years, because, for example, there's lots of innovations that we're seeing. I don't know, let's say, for example, self-driving vehicles, and they are within that sphere, aren't they? But people have quite often moved them away from it. So I would say, with the technology perspective, the previous person said, if you can link it to what's been discussed before, it's definitely something, because again, you're making that contribution. You can also show that there is the danger always with a hot topic that people are just discussing something that's seen as relevant now. If you can show that kind of, that's something that's, of continuous interest, it's a really, really good thing to do.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking time to tell us more about the call for papers and what you're looking for, and of course doing it as well too. I know it's a lot of work, but it's really exciting to have you all involved in this and be sharing your expertise with helping to develop more research on AI and generative AI. Any final comments or advice you might have before we wrap up?
Oh, final comments or advice. I mean, I think the important thing is you've got to make the submission as strong as it can be. And I suppose that means a few key things, some of which we've already talked about. It's number one, making sure it aligns with the special issue theme. Number two, of course, making sure it aligns with the kind of research that you see in JAR. Number three, it's got to have a strong contribution, but in particular, a strong contribution to help advertisers. And often one of the things I read in my different roles as associate editor at places like JAR and other journals is that sometimes people leave the managerial implications as a bit of an afterthought. And so I think it's really worth making sure you spend the time developing those and making sure that they're very concrete and tangible, that somebody could read that paper and say, what would I as an advertiser do differently as a consequence of reading this paper, of looking at this research. So there's the usual things around the contribution, the fit with the special issue, but that's the one thing I often see, is that the managerial implications are often more of an afterthought rather than they should take much more, become much more important than that in the article. And I think that's what we'll be looking at in the call for papers. But Des and Eddie may want to add some other things as well.
Yeah, what I would kind of say is I would say go all in for it. If you're going to go for it, just sort of go, put everything into it. Plus that's what I would really say. Put everything into it. That you don't want to hold nothing back, because it is going to be very competitive, and you want to make sure that that you put the work into any paper. It's hard to any paper. Just make sure that you've covered all the bases. It's really what Ben said there. That's what I would kind of say there, really.
So basically, our topic is like the influence of AI on advertisers, the influence of AI on consumers or the audience, and also the opportunities and challenges of using AI, harnessing AI and Gen AI in advertising industry. So yeah, let's make it. It's quite exciting, and we have similar topics in other journals, and it's really good to have this similar topic in JR, and yeah, look forward to the submissions.
Awesome. It looks like we had one final question as well too. Did you folks want to take a look at that, or?
Oh, okay, I missed that. Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. There's been a lot. It's been good.
What's the?
I think the answer to that is it really depends on the perspective you're taking in your research. So I think the perspective you want to take is what's important there. I don't think we would view it as one side or the other, but I think it just depends on the perspective that your research is taking there. Sorry, the question was, do you feel advertisers are client side rather than agency?
Yeah, no, I agree with Ben, Beverly. And if you've got any queries, we're very happy to sort of take them afterwards, because I think I think the one thing as well, we all know ourselves, writing these papers is really hard, and I think that you put so much into them. We're all the same. We're all reviewers and we're writers as well. When you get the decision through, you're either happy or sad, or if it's a revision, you're happy as well. So yeah, any other questions, we're very happy to sort of take them afterwards as well. That's no problem at all.
No, and I just wanted to finish up from my side from saying thanks everyone for attending and making the time, which we appreciate. We look forward to receiving your submissions.
Yeah, same from me as well. Thanks, guys. I've really enjoyed it, and thanks to Colin for organising it.
Awesome. Thank you again for doing it, and thank you for everyone for coming. Yeah. Cool. Have a great rest of your day.
All right. Cheers. Bye.
You too. Bye-bye.
Yes, bye.
Bye.